Hi, I'm Barry List of Informs, and you're watching a segment in a series about the scholarly journals that are published by Informs. Our guest today is Srinivas Bollapragada. He's the editor-in-chief of Interfaces, a practice journal of Informs. And let me ask you to start off by telling us a little bit about what Interfaces is, what your editorial philosophy is.
First, thanks Barry for having me.
Sure.
The mission of Interfaces is to publish papers that focus on the practice of operations research and management science and the impact that this practice has on organizations throughout the world. Though most of our articles describe successful implementations of operations research, we also publish other articles such as tutorials and review papers that focus on the practice of OR. I also encourage non-traditional papers such as those that describe implementations which have failed in a teachable manner.
Oh, that's interesting.
So that others don't have to make the same
mistakes. Because we know that you can learn a lot from failures, but in the scholarly publishing world that might not be the kind of paper that meets the guidelines of a journal.
Yeah, for some of the journals it is not, but I think I would like others to report on such implementations, especially if they teach others not to make the same mistakes.
Great. Okay, how did you personally become involved with Interfaces? How did you learn about the journal? I think that you had a personal involvement in publishing with the journal even before you became an editor.
I had learned about Interfaces during my first year as a doctoral student at the business school at Carnegie Mellon University. My advisor, Professor Thomas Martin, used to teach a course called Operations Management Seminar, in which we used a number of papers from Interfaces. After I started working for GE, I published several papers in Interfaces. And my first Interfaces paper was an Edelman finalist for the work that we had done for the National Broadcasting Company. The previous editor-in-chief, Jeff Kahn, had invited me to join his editorial board as an associate editor back in 2005. 6 years later, at the end of his second term, they had named me as the editor-in-chief.
Now, I thought I would just circle back and talk about that paper because I found it fascinating. I was at the Edelman competition when you presented, and people don't think of broadcasting as being very much involved with math, but you helped NBC developing an advertising plan. Am I right?
That's correct, actually. I mean, this was back in '96 when I first met the sales people at National Broadcasting Company. They were actually developing these sales plans, what are called sales plans, manually. I mean, this is during the upfront market where they sell anywhere between 60 to 80% of their advertising inventory, and in a 2-week period. And during this time, advertisers approach NBC with what are called sales requests. A typical sales request consists of the amount of money that an advertiser would want to spend with NBC, and also the various requirements on how their ads should be distributed over the year. And it used to take them about 4 hours to generate a schedule of commercials to air for one client to meet their requirements. And we had actually developed an algorithm and a decision support system that had automated that process and then generated a sales plan optimally to minimize the errors in meeting the requirements and maximize the revenues for NBC.
And I might add that every January issue of Interfaces is dedicated to the Edelman competition papers from the previous year. So readers who are interested in the very best in the practice world can start as an introduction with the January issue.
Exactly, yeah.
I'm an author. I'm interested in submitting a paper to Interfaces. Can you give me some do's and don'ts, especially are there any red flags for you?
A key requirement for Interfaces is that the work be implemented and in use. If that has not happened, I would encourage the authors to wait for the implementation to be completed or consider some other journal for publishing that work. The paper submitted should also have something novel in it. It cannot be a routine implementation of a well-known technique unless there is something novel to be learned from that implementation. Beyond that, I encourage authors to carefully follow the submission guidelines. Interfaces have certain unique requirements. For example, we require that all the mathematical notation be placed in the appendix. Not following these guidelines when submitting the initial manuscript will needlessly lengthen the review process.
Let me ask you what direction you see the journal and the field going in. Also, are you spotting, let's say, the next hot thing?
As you know, analytics is the current hot thing. Most OR organizations in the industry have realized that it is not sufficient for their employees to just have the skills required to develop mathematical algorithms. It is also important to have the skills to determine the right problem to solve, to gather requirements, handle data, and work with software engineers to get their algorithms implemented. These skills lead to more of our work getting into practice. And also the abilities to handle massive amounts of data and develop distributed algorithms. I believe those skills will be sought after in the near future.
And this will show up in your journal in the forms of papers about completed work that's been done.
Exactly. In fact, actually, we are currently considering doing a special issue on big data and cloud computing. I think the field is getting mature enough that we can do a special issue in that area. And we haven't decided on that, but I think we'll probably do it in the near future.
Mm-hmm. How does Interfaces fit in with the other Informs journals that are published?
Interfaces is unique in that it focuses primarily on the practice of operations research and management science. Implementation and usage of the work performed is a litmus test for publishing in Interfaces for most of the articles. There is no other journal with such a requirement. The journal Operations Research has the OR practice area, which publishes papers that are similar to those in Interfaces. There are a few other journals also have started to encourage practice-oriented papers, but Interfaces is really the only journal that focuses mainly on practice.
Mm-hmm. Are you seeing any trends that are papers published in Interfaces that are moving from the journal into the society at large?
I believe that Interfaces has played a major role over the years in helping grow the profession of operations research and analytics. The articles in Interfaces are widely used in teaching and research. Successful applications that had been described in the journal have resulted in other companies adopting the techniques described in those papers. This adoption has happened not just in the US, but across the world. Just the Edelman papers that are published in the first issue of Interfaces every year have saved tens or even hundreds of billions of dollars for their organizations. I'm sure that savings resulting from the reuse of these techniques by other organizations are even larger.
Thank you, Dr. Bollapragada, for granting this interview, and thank you for watching this segment, and you may want to see others in the series. If you'd like to learn more about Informs and scholarly publishing, visit us on the web. Our URL is www.informs.org. Thank you and good day.